Welcome to Talent Experience Live, your weekly look at all of the hot topics in HR.
People are 28% more productive when they use vacation time.
Involving themselves very deeply in diversity and inclusion efforts.
Ramping up college recruiting and career fairs.
Artificial intelligence helped automate certain tasks.
50% more applications. How do you make your company culture still stand out?
What does that look like in this new virtual world?
Welcome everyone to another episode of Talent Experience Live. Thank you all, of course, for joining. This, of course, is your weekly look at the hot topics in HR, interviews with leaders, and of course, our favorite here at Phenom, new HR tech. This is covering everything that you need to know in recruitment, talent acquisition, and of course, talent management. But it doesn't stop here. Of course, we have many social platforms where we are constantly pushing out content. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube to stay up to date. And if you can't make the weekly episode at noon, you can always catch the recaps there. Thank you once again for joining. Of course, this is a live show. And what makes live so special is having interactions with the people at home, with the people batting dogs away as they try and jump into your meetings. So feel free to sound off in the chat, chime in with any questions, comments, concerns. To steal something from my mentor, Tom Tate, if you want to chime in with where you're from, where you're watching from, we always love that as well. So feel free to sound off in the comment sections. But enough talk about that. One more promotional thing that I wanted to plug before we get started, and that would be we have I Am HR next week, December 8th through the 10th. So please register for that. It's a 3-day event complete with power sessions from customer success stories, keynotes from industry leaders, and of course, product updates from Phenom. So if you haven't, feel free to jump into the phenom.com/IamHR. We have a short little promotional video, so we'll run that right now for you. There you go. Quick little video, nothing too long. Like I said, December 8th through the 10th. And of course, I forgot to mention it's free. So definitely register if you're short on any SHRM or HRCI event credits. You get them there. So definitely register. But enough talk about the promotion, about the show. You guys are here to hear a little bit more about industry thought and leadership. So today's topic is all around how to use data-driven tools to make the best leadership decisions. As we all know, hiring leaders have no easy task, but the data that evaluates a candidate's behavior and cognitive abilities, as well as their work preferences, can also help us out and help us make solid, reliable decisions. And with that, we have a very special guest today who recently presented for Philly SHRM around this topic, and he is especially passionate about it, specifically leadership and assessing leaders, and how he can take a recruiting angle, or how you can take a recruiting angle. Last year alone, we spent over $14 billion a year on development, but the numbers don't show that we are doing a good job. So let's find out more from Mike Guglielmo about everything that you need to know from assessing talent and turning them into leaders. Without any more hesitation, let's bring on Mike. Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good, Devin. How are you?
I am doing all right. And also shout out to Brent Collins joining us from Illinois, the Windy City, I imagine, close to Chicago. Maybe he's a Bear fan, maybe he isn't. But welcome to the show, Mike. And one thing that we always love doing here on the show is kicking it off and finding out how people got to where they are today. Everyone has their idea of a straight linear path to where they get and where their career goals are. But oftentimes that's not the case. So how did you become such an expert in data-driven leadership?
Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, so let's correct that right now. But I do know quite a bit. When you talk about straight line and career paths, I've had anything but. When I graduated with an undergrad degree in marketing, I immediately decided, well, let's see if I could do well in accounting, because there weren't any jobs. So I went into accounting, and then I went into IT, and then I went into operations, and then I finally found my way into HR because I was going to Temple, where I've been teaching for over 30 years, and the last 4 years as a full-time professor. But I wound up going for my graduate degree, my MBA at Temple, started as a finance major. And a couple of professors, when I took some elective HR classes, said, you know what, we need you on our side to help with some of the more objective data that we need to prove how these things work. Is there a return on investment? So I made the decision to go into HR as a major. And about a year later, I started teaching at Temple. This is in the 80s. This is where you're supposed to say, oh, you don't look that old. But I started doing teaching in the late 80s and continued to do that, and sort of found my way in and out of accounting and finance roles, IT roles. I've actually been a divisional controller. I've been a regional chief information officer, but my passion's always been HR. So sooner or later, over time, I got into HR roles, went into recruiting, and then got into employee relations and labor relations and human resource information systems. So I did that for a while, had many different roles in a couple of pretty major companies in the area. And for the last 4 years, as I said, I've been teaching full-time at Temple University in the HR department and enjoying it very much.
It sounds like that career path, you have a lot of things that you can use for the rest of your life. I mean, you have the marketing background, so you can make stuff look cool, make it look appealing. You have the accounting background, so I'm sure you're balancing your own books. The IT, you mentioned before the call that you're able to fix some internet issues and things like that. So happy to hear that now you are helping human resources departments with all of these sorts of things. But one thing that you mentioned was objective data. And I really have an interesting thought around that, because it's certainly important, but when it comes to deciding leaders and really finding leaders within your organizations, oftentimes people view that as something very subjective. So number one, why is it important to use objective data for that, and how do you get it?
So, well, we only have until 1, right? I've got plenty to say on this topic. So let me start here. Since I've been in the business world since the 80s, I have watched and studied performance management and people doing subjective ratings of individuals. You can do, peer review type of work. You can have engagement data that sort of rolls up, even anonymously, but roll it up under a manager. You can do 360s, but most of what I just said is pretty much subjective. And with that, you get these inherent biases, most times not intentional, but you get these biases because you think people should look and act like you in a particular role. And I don't mean that figuratively, or literally, I mean it figuratively, that if you're successful, then if they have the same types of characteristics and same background, same education, same experiences, that they should do the same type of work. And that's really a faulty premise to go with. So I've really sort of honed this skill around, so how do I get objective data and how do we use it to look at individuals? Well, spending enough time in the healthcare industry, which I spent before I went full-time at Temple, spent almost 10 years at a major long-term care company. And in there, even though I was responsible for recruiting, our job was never done. We had hundreds, sometimes thousands of openings, and trying to find nurses and doctors and therapists for our particular industry was hard to begin with. It wasn't quite as sexy as a hospital job. So we went about it, and every time we lost someone, it was just another opening that we had to deal with. And we used to categorize it as, we just had this giant bucket with holes in the bottom, and we just keep filling it. It just keeps pouring out. So what are we going to do about that? And we launched into a data-driven project that said, okay, what's behind this? We realized that we really weren't doing, even though we had a subjectively measured performance management system, it wasn't being done consistently. It wasn't being done across all levels of positions, literally from our CEO down to someone who would be a dietary aide. And we had to change that pretty quickly, and we did. And even after that, it still didn't matter. So we said, all right, what are we missing here? And I started to really dive into some of the research, and it kept pointing back to leaders are really driving this. People want to do a great job, and they don't want a whole lot back. It's rarely money that they expect as their number one driver. That's usually number 4 or 5. It's historically been that way for a long time. Everybody cares about it, but it's not what gets you up in the morning to go do your job. And what they want is a leader who's going to respect them enough to talk to them on a regular basis, not through email primarily. They're going to coach them as need be. They're going to give them a career path, even if it is sort of, not linear, much like mine. I mean, I've had some great bosses that have said, hey, I know you're in IT, but I see you being able to do some things, and we're going to loan you out to HR when they put in a new HR system. So you want a boss that's going to think about your career, number one thing that people care about. And you also want to know that the work that you do, and if any of you have ever heard of Daniel Pink, he talks about this, that you want to be rewarded equitably for what you do, right? There's a level of autonomy that everybody wants in their job, but not everybody has a chance to get that. Maybe they get a little more now since we're all working from home, but they do want some equitable remuneration for what they do. All right. So we looked at our leaders and we said, we're not choosing leaders in any way that resembles the things that I just suggested. So how were we? Well, the best nurse or the best doctor or the best therapist would become the next leader because their technical expertise sort of qualified them to move up into the ranks. And that was one of the worst things that we could have done. I had a little bit of anecdotal experience around that when I ran an IT group, and I had programmers and systems engineers that worked for me. And I can tell you the best programmers and the best engineers did not automatically equate with the best leaders. So what do you do about that? Well, number one, if you are going to put somebody into a leadership role, you better train them. And there's a body of work by Dr. Rhea Hawkins, who I strongly suggest, if you take a look at her work, she runs a company called Take Charge Consulting, and she wrote a white paper called "Are You Doing Enough to Develop Your Leaders?" It's available on her website. And she says that frontline supervisors, those that are going into supervisory roles, their very first supervisory role, 47% of them get no training whatsoever. So how are you supposed to learn how to be a leader and be an effective leader if all you've ever been is an individual contributor and now you're thrust into this role? 87% of them wish they had some training, any training, before they took the role. And even with that, 60% of them are likely to fail because the next level up, the managers of managers, aren't adequately prepared either. So in this healthcare organization, we put together training around the basics and said, hey, let's take a look at what they need to do. Still wasn't enough. We still had too much turnover. So did some more research and found that the best companies, the benchmark companies, were using assessment tools to measure whether or not the person had the basic behavioral traits, cognitive ability, and work style desire to be successful in the role based on either people who were successful in the company already or a national benchmark. And depending on which tool you use, some use top performers within the company, others use a national database they've developed over time. And it certainly can be delineated by company and industry and segment. So you can get down to some level of specificity around that. And what I've found is that the objective data that comes out of that assessment, I'm going to name a couple of them, and I am absolutely assessment agnostic. I don't care what you use, but to use something that individuals will test themselves. It's not someone observing them alone. It's them testing themselves against this benchmark, internally or externally, will give you a really important data point, an objective data point, one that has validity and reliability in the testing mechanism, as well as passes EOC muster, because the correlation coefficient exceeds what is needed for compliance, far exceeds it. So you could rest pretty well and assured that that assessment data is going to give you better information than you would have by not having it. And what I found is that when we started using that, we were able to look at the existing body of leaders within our company. We did everyone that managed even one person, they took the assessment. We found, and we told everybody up front, this is not a witch hunt. This is to help you get better at what you're doing. And, people would say all the time, hey, I don't know what's expected of me. Well, how come, people say I'm not meeting the expectations, but they don't tell me what it is I'm supposed to get there and how I'm supposed to get there, the behaviors to get there. So this tool would tell you top performance looks like this. You are sort of wired a certain way, but it can be learned. So here's what you need to start doing, stop doing, or keep doing. That said, we were able to find a couple of people that said, you know what, this supervisory thing's not for me. I want to go back to being a subject matter expert or an individual contributor. For anyone that we were going to promote, we looked at not only the subjective performance and 360s and competency ratings and things like that, but this objective measure that we would get from the assessment tool and other data measures like how is their particular area of responsibility doing financially? How are they doing with external customer satisfaction? How are we doing with employee engagement? How are we doing with operational results? So all of those things would go into what I like to call a weighted composite average that we would use as for succession planning, but also, who's up next for promotion. The last thing I want to say on this subject, and then you can ask me any questions or go on to another topic. In doing this, using the tool that we did, I as I got to understand more of it, I got certified in it. I'm certified in 2 tools already, and I'm going to be certified in a third later this month. I found that, hey, wait a minute, I'm only looking at the people that we're looking to promote internally. What about all the people we're hiring from the outside? And I have to tell you, there's an awful lot of applicant tracking systems and talent management systems that use basically just the data from the person's resume, which, if you really think about it, a lot of places use an iceberg analogy that all you're looking at when you cull through that information and parse it out, it's basically 10% of the person. It's not the total person. It's not their behaviors. It's not their motivators. It's not their work preference, their work style preference. So to use a tool like this, in addition to basic interviewing and other screening tools, we were actually able to utilize the assessment tool that we were using internally with our external candidates. We would use it when we would get down to our final 2 candidates, our finalists. And the beauty of using a tool like that is it would actually give us interviewing questions that would focus in on where they had gaps from a competency standpoint compared to the top performers in that same job group. And as someone who's been doing recruiting for probably 2/3 of my career, I never had a tool like that. We were always trained to sort of call that out of the conversation with people. And to be able to have this set up, and it's not me judging it based on how people answer and my probing questions. This is based on them answering a set of valid and reliable questions against top performers. And the tool will come back and say, hey, these are the 3 competencies that you need to probe on. Doesn't mean the person doesn't have the competency or hasn't developed the competency in those behaviors, but their natural inclination is not that way. So you need to probe in on that. And then if you have other people that ask similar questions or the same question, you can calibrate on that after the interview to get to a better decision. And I'm telling you, we did scatter plot charts to take a look at how we were doing with that assessment data, which was not the only thing we used. We did use a full suite of tools in interviewing, but we would do basically a correlation of, say, the assessment rating to profitability once they were in the role, to employee engagement, to turnover. And we were doing tremendously well after we started using the assessment tool. And I've heard similar stories from others that the assessment tool adds one more level of objective data to your decision making, but it's not the lone item that you're going to use in making a decision about talent. Sorry for the long answer, but hopefully
no. It's a little echo. I think that it was a great answer for the question. But however, one thing that popped into my mind is obviously you are chatting with a number of Gen Z individuals who are going into the workforce for tomorrow. So when we look at it from the HR, from the organization standpoint, it's absolutely great to have these tools to assess individuals. However, how does the newest generation of leaders feel about that, where they're going to be judged differently than an individual would who particularly would have just entered a resume? Is it a positive feedback? Is it something that we'll get used to, like scanning our faces to open our iPhones or unlocking them with our fingerprints? Kind of what is the thought process there? Okay, so this is where individuals have to have no fear around doing these assessments. I use myself as an example because this is don't take the tool as the not on my end. My cats don't bark. It's quite all right, Devin. The tool that I'm going to refer to is, and the first one that I was ever certified on was the Myers-Briggs assessment. All right. Now, this is strict personality, not total person, but almost every assessment tool has some element of personality traits in it. All right. If you look at my Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ. All right. I'm an extrovert. I think big picture. I think more with logic than I do harmony, and I'm very organized. When you look at that and you think about the very first 2 jobs that I had in accounting /finance, and then IT, my personality type would suggest, if folks use that, would say, don't hire Mike. He's not going to like this job. What I'll tell you is we're trained in these certifications that personality is only one piece of it, work styles another, motivators are another, and behaviors are another. And because behaviors can be trained, I learned to do these things really well. And the beauty of it is I would never want to do my career over again, because what I learned in finance and accounting and IT positioned me extremely well for other jobs in IT
and in HR later on. So it will give you an idea of what your strong personal preference is for the kind of work that you'd like to do. But I encourage all of my graduating students, that can't be the only thing that you want to do. Your life and your roles are going to take this sometimes circuitous route that may lead back to what you ultimately want to do or leads to something completely different. If you look at a chart of where most jobs are by personality, I landed diametrically opposed. Like, I can't be any further away from what I first started doing to what I'm doing or was doing before I became a teacher. So the good thing is you learn from those experiences, and most trained interviewers and folks that are trained on how to read these assessment tools will say, okay, is the person able to overcome? Have they overcome these general traits? And if they haven't, let's talk about that with their hiring managers so they know going in. I like more open-ended challenges that allow me to be creative. I don't want to be in a box. All right. So that if you're going to put me now into a job like that, I probably wouldn't succeed at it. But back in the early part of my career, had I known, hey, you're going to do this job in accounting, and I did every job in the accounting department at one point in time, but you're not going to do it forever, it would have made it a whole lot more pleasurable when I was doing it, knowing this is just a training ground for me. So I think the lesson for the Gen Zs, which includes my own kids, like, don't worry about what you're doing right now. Don't worry about what you may assess as. Use it as a tool that's ultimately going to lead you where you want to be. And I'm here to tell you, you can do just about anything for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. You don't want to be in it forever. You don't want to feel like you're locked into something and you don't have any options. And that's a trait of a great leader, is to look at the person's total personality picture and total person picture and say, hey, Devin, I notice here that, you like to be creative, but you also like structure. So we're going to try to figure out what the next thing is for you. And for really incredible leaders, the next thing for you may be, I'm saying this facetiously, but it may be, it's not at Phenom People, like I've had people that have worked for me that were stars that worked for me that one day came and said, hey, I don't know what to tell you, but I really want to go to law school. I'm like, great, I'll help you any way I can. I had top recruiters that said, I want to be a nurse, and I'd help them get into nursing school. So knowing all this ahead of time really helps the development conversation. And I got to tell you, not that I was any great leadership star, but I never had a problem filling openings. People knew that we in our department were committed to folks' success and growth. So they wanted to be part of that, and it worked out really well. Does that answer the question, Devin?
100%. It sounds like this as a whole, these sort of technologies can add to culture rather than take away from it, because you go into a partnership with your team with an understanding of, hey, at some point you may graduate from this organization. We want you to graduate from this role, but we understand we want to give you the best tools for success to move on. And that's going to prevent some of the Glassdoor bad ratings, right? Some of that negative publicity, if you look at it as a graduation and adding skills. The other thing that I grabbed from what you were mentioning was, this is really going to help craft the interview to get the most out of the candidate, right? And understand what they are putting forward. Whether you're recruiting through a staffing agency or through in-house, whoever comes into that door for your open position is going to put their best foot forward. That's the reason why people wear suits, why resumes are printed on fancy paper and not regular loose leaf or what have you. They want to put their best effort, and they're going to be trained to an extent. They're going to do research on my favorite interview question, strengths and weaknesses. Yep. And it sounds like when you leverage a tool like this combined with something like a fit score or some other assessment, you'll be able to get the real idea of what this individual is looking for and if they will eventually become a good leader, whether it's for your organization or not. what would be an example of a question that would potentially replace that strengths and weaknesses? Favorite question.
Okay, so this is going to sound a little trite, but it's the first one that comes to my mind. Tell me about a time when you were on a team and you felt like your voice wasn't being heard. How did you get your opinion out? What was the result? What did you learn from that experience? Blah, blah, blah. And there's different variations of that question. But if the person is, a little, from a behavioral standpoint, a little more reserved, they really, I'm going back to my Myers-Briggs training here, but you'll get the idea. If they are, someone who doesn't like to just talk off the cuff, well, as team meetings go on or group meetings go on to get a project done, some individuals may need a little extra time to think through the problem-solving effort. So to ask them that and know that that's their natural proclivity is really getting under the covers to figure out, like, what have you learned? We know that you're probably not going to be offering recommendations sort of willy-nilly like I would as an extrovert and as an intuitive, right? If I needed more data and I was introverted, I may not bring things up in sort of like a creative session. So how do I get my voice heard? And getting that out of somebody, which you would think, especially if it's a project management role, that they are able to get their voice out. They're going to have to, or they're leading the project. How do you make sure that everyone on your team gets their voice out? Because you may have individuals that think a little differently, that respond differently, that contribute differently, and you want that out. One thing I want to come back to real quick, Devin, that you mentioned was this contribution to culture. And these assessment tools, not all of them, but some of them are really starting to hone in on how do we improve diversity through culture. And culture, defined by Deloitte, is the aggregate of behaviors, motivations, and work styles. So if these tools measure those things, and you've got a particular culture that's strong either at the corporate level or at a team level, and you want to add diversity to that, your questions in that assessment tool would kind of give you an insight into that is far different than what the traditional hiring for ethnic or gender diversity sort of requires. So there's a different look at this, and most people that really pay attention to their D&I efforts know that not everything is going to be a visible diversity element. You have many invisible diversity elements, and how else are you going to get that out of people? You're not going to ask them in an interview, right? So to have some of that and have a scientifically validated way of looking at behaviors, motivators, and work style is a way to add diversity at the team level, which I'm not sure you're going to get by asking interview questions. Well, without an assessment tool, let me put it that way.
No, that makes complete and total sense. And the big thing that jumps into my mind is culture add versus culture fit there. Because a lot of organizations, when they're looking at a pool of candidates, they're looking for culture fit, which traditionally would be, people that went to the same school, that have the same background, that performed exactly the same. Whereas it sounds like these tools may give you a bit more insight into culture add and really getting people with a diverse thought process as opposed to just a diverse background. Now, the last...
I could not agree more to the way you summed that up.
Awesome. And the last question that I have for you before we let you go, first of all, I want to thank you. This has been tremendously insightful. And that is, when recruiters are now hearing this and preparing for 2021, they're probably in a very similar boat to the way candidates are, right? They have all of this technology, all of these tools to hopefully make their job easier, but it's kind of happened overnight, right? I think back to, I was a recruiter 5 years ago at this point, and I looked at a resume. That was it. I brought somebody in, I asked the traditional interview questions, and now with FitScore, with these assessment tools, with personality, insights, all of these things, how can they still remain, I guess, true to their recruiting ways and their recruitment processes and not feel like they're kind of getting pushed aside by technology? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would pay attention to the data. Okay. I'm a big believer in calibrating the interview scores. And, you can score different interview competencies that you're looking for and behaviors, scale 1 to 5, 1 to 7, whatever. And having those scores calibrated across multiple interviewers is a big deal for me. I'd never want my voice alone. I was pretty good when I did it, but I made mistakes, and people make mistakes, and your own personal biases, as much as you try, as much training as you go through to avoid some of the bias that you inherently have, it's hard to eliminate it completely. People, interviewees have all the questions down now because every question's available on the internet, right? They put on their best face. Their resume is scrubbed to a pristine level, but having a tool like this now that you can then calibrate with an interviewing panel is really important to me, because it can't just be your own word or only your word and your score as the way that you get at the best fit for the candidate with your company. I will make mention, I've had this question come up a lot in my classes as we talk about recruiting, and I've had different experiences with this over time in different companies, but the rule of thumb, and I wish I had where the research was from on this. I could probably dig it up somewhere if I had to, but I know from my peers at Temple and from other places that this has come up often, that when you get past the fourth interviewer of a particular candidate, the added value to the decision about whether to hire or not, when you add a fifth interviewer or a sixth interviewer, drops off the cliff. So the optimal number of people that should interview people is 4. All right. Your tradition is 5, whatever. You can do whatever you need to, but you're not going to get a whole lot more out of that. What I would strongly suggest to our audience or anyone who winds up in recruiting is, I've been in companies where we've had 12 to 15 interviewers. And when you get to the 13th or the 14th or the 15th, and someone says, nope, don't like him or her, and you get, that they're out, we've made terrible decisions because it was really unnecessary to have that many voices in the mix. So I just thought I'd bring that up because it's an important thing for me to keep it a tight number, and one that, again, I'm sorry I don't have the research that it's based on, but I know from folks that do this for a living and from other researchers that 4 was always the magic number, and we always strive for that in our work.
That's a great point, and also a great sound advice. The one way that I think I can sum this up, and listening to you and having this conversation with you, it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Moneyball, right? And we look at this competitive landscape, which is streaming on Netflix now. They're not a sponsor of the show. They don't pay me at all. But if you have some spare time this weekend, definitely watch Moneyball. But it's the story of a small team who's very, they're struggling to compete against the Yankees, against these large market teams. And they look to data to really try and beat them on some of the things that may not show up on the box sheet, right? So some of these personality assessments and some of those sort of things. So I think, Mike, number one, is that one of your favorite movies? And number two, would that be a fair assessment of the talent landscape today and how teams can look at leveraging data in a way to make their leaders and also their organization stronger with the talent on their team? So
yes, it is one of my favorite movies. I love that movie. And if you remember, the A's used on base percentage as one of their primary data points to look at individuals. So, Theo Epstein certainly parlayed that into world championships for two beleaguered franchises, and hopefully the Phillies can pick him up. But whatever. What I would say is that there's a whole nother landscape that includes scientific analysis, and it's more than regression analysis, but it's more in the predictive analytics realm of what may happen, what's more likely to happen, what causes something to happen. And when you get all these different measures that I talked about before, looking at existing talent, the financial performance of their unit, customer satisfaction, employee engagement, their performance ratings, competency ratings, the assessment score, things like that. There's a way and a tool, and these tools are available for purchase out there, and companies are more than happy to use it. But there's a way to take all these disparate variables and make sense of them, and it's a tool which I'm not expert in, but I've hired someone in a prior job to use this to say, what are the one or two levers that we can really go after to make sure that we're hiring the best person or promoting the best person that has even higher correlation or causation to our ultimate outcomes, which many times for many companies is going to be better financial or customer results. And the tool is called structured equation modeling, and the acronym is SEM. So if anybody's ever heard of it or has an opportunity to use it, we were able to figure out in our world, in our dashboard, which areas of leadership and not just of those leadership capabilities, but which leaders and which objective measures were most correlated back to financial and customer outcomes. So that to me, and I don't know how much they use that tool in Moneyball, but anything that's going to give you a leg up on what can happen and what you can do to sort of move the levers to help you get there, it's going to help you beat your competition. So why wouldn't you want to at least explore it? It's not all that expensive. I mentioned earlier, I'll just again, I'm agnostic to the assessment tools, but there's many of them out there that Caliper, it's now PSI, Hogan, Strength Finders, Profiles, owned by Wiley. There's another one called Human Intelligence. There's a ton of them out there. So whatever works for you is scalable. You can use it within your organization. My point to many leaders that I coach on this is these things, if you look at it on a cost per leader basis, is probably not going to cost you, and don't quote me on any price, but I'm just going to give you an approximation. To do it per leader, to use it per leader, might cost you $75 a liter, it might cost you $250 per liter. Isn't that worth getting the right leader in the right spot? Just think about what it costs in turnover costs, and to make a better decision versus spending a couple $100 to make it an even better decision. To me, it's a no-brainer. So again, whatever you choose, I think you can use in these composite scores to figure out who the best talent is within your organization and to help you hire the best talent from the outside. One more metric I'll give you, or ratio I'll give you. Peter Capelli, Dr. Peter Capelli, who teaches at Wharton, wrote a book called Talent on Demand. And he said, and he does all this research around what the best companies do with their internal talent. And he said that the best companies, the most profitable, the ones that are most sustainable, have a 2-to-1 ratio of hiring from within, that's the 2, to 1 hiring from outside. And it makes sense intuitively, right? You're going to give people within the company a path to get to a promotable opportunity. And when you don't have enough people internally, you're going to hire from the outside. And, at one of my companies, we were basically at a 1-to-1 ratio, By the time I left that company to go into teaching full time, we were at a 1.5 to 1 ratio, and it helped overall to let people know, hey, we're invested in you and your growth and your opportunities. So don't leave. We're going to help you find the right path within the company.
Awesome. Mike, this has been spectacular. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Before we go, if anyone wants to talk with you more about this or to get more information, is there some place that they can go and chat with you, LinkedIn or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm probably the only Michael Guglielmo or Mike Guglielmo out there that says academic director for Temple University. So if you find me there, feel free to send out my LinkedIn URL if you want, Devin. It's fine with me. I'm happy to connect with folks and start a conversation. Be great.
Cool.
I really
awesome, Michael.
It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, and stay safe. And hopefully we'll be able to link up in Philly sometime soon.
That would be wonderful.
We'll see you. Have a good one.
Thanks so much. Bye now.
Well, there you have it. That was Mike Guglielmo from Temple talking all around data and how it can help you not only find talent for your organization, but also leaders within your organizations. So definitely, if there's one takeaway that I took, it's watch Moneyball this weekend to really get the juices going for making data-driven decisions and see how it helped Brad Pitt shape a competitive team. Next up, before we go, we do have some customer success stories. So without any more hesitations, let's bring on Natalie McKnight for that. Hey Nat, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm on cloud 9. I'm all ready to go open up my calculator app and start crunching numbers and all sorts of stuff after that last session. But I know you have a great success story this week. So I want to hand the floor over to you and let's see what you have to share.
Great. Yeah. So this customer story is a great customer of ours, FIS, and I wanted to share some results that they've gotten out of a recent adoption initiative that they've partnered with their customer success manager on. And they called it a competition called the Phenom Classic. It was a 6-week competition just ahead of the holidays where all of their recruiters had an opportunity to win monetary gifts in exchange for how often they were using the CRM, and they created this elaborate point system with weighted averages and all these crazy geeky things, and really drummed up a lot of hype around this competition to get the recruiters in the system and get them using the platform. And what this does is it creates a lot of short-term hype, and also allows for a lot more results to be seen short term to continue motivating the recruiters to go back so that they can see even more results. And some of those results that we saw out of the 6-week initiative were 91% of their users were active. That was up 17% overall. They had over 751 logins. Their actions increased over 700%. Their email templates created increased exponentially. They sent 44% more email campaigns, and they were able to generate 831 leads from those campaigns, and that's up over 1,000%. So it was just such an awesome initiative. It was so successful. The recruiters were, they're naturally competitive, right? As a group, they wanted to outperform each other. And we think that this is something that's really beneficial for all of our customers in terms of trying to drum up that usage and generate that excitement. So if you're interested, if you are a current Phenom customer and you're interested in learning more about these CRM adoption competitions, reach out to your customer success manager. We're happy to partner with you on this and really generate an exciting program for you. And hopefully we'll have some more stories to share just like this in the coming weeks as well.
Natalie, that's an awesome story and super exciting. I know that Zach Elder is going to be a part of IMHR next week. I think he's going to be covering this. He's from FIS as well. So if you're interested in hearing more about the gamification and how to boost adoption for really any technology that you're using, not just Phenom, definitely check it out. Natalie, this is awesome. I love hearing that 2021, it sounds like it's going to be, we're turning a new page. You know, the vaccine's coming. We're getting excited. CRM adoption's up. We're going to start to see people in person again, hopefully very soon. But this is awesome. Thank you for the success story. And any parting shots? Any last words?
No, just glad we're repping my alma mater here, interviewing Temple University employees. Any plug for the owls that I can get, I will absolutely give. So, and it's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. I was almost convinced that Mike was going to say his favorite movie was Invincible, the Disney movie about the Philadelphia Eagles, but I had a feeling it might be Moneyball. But thank you so much, Nat. We'll chat soon. I believe we are off next week because of IMHR, but the following week we will have another episode. So we'll see you then.
See you then.
Bye. Well, there you have it. That is another episode of TXL in the books. Like I said, we are off next week. Another episode following up on the 17th. Quick maths there. Can't wait to see you there soon. And have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Stay safe.